The arena lights burned down on the ring, casting long shadows over the canvas. The crowd roared, a sea of faces blurred by the glare. In the center stood Michael the Hammer Harris, fists raised, sweat glistening on his brow. Across from him, Derek the King. Monroe smirked, his gloves tapping together in anticipation. Michael had trained for this moment his entire life. From the gritty gyms of Detroit to the undercard fights in Vegas, he had clawed his way up, earning every win with blood and grit. This championship bout was supposed to be his crowning achievement. But from the first bell, something was off. Monroe's punches landed with unnatural force, his movements too precise, too rehearsed. Michael's gloves felt heavy, his footing uncertain. By the third round, his vision blurred, a metallic taste coating his tongue. In the fourth, Monroe delivered a devastating uppercut, sending Michael sprawling to the mat. The referee's count echoed in his ears, each number a hammer blow to his dreams. The match ended in a technical knockout. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Media outlets ran headlines questioning Michael's integrity, suggesting he had thrown the fight. Anonymous sources claimed he had tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. Sponsors withdrew, fans turned their backs. Michael knew the truth. His gloves had been tampered with, his water bottle laced with a sedative. Officials had been bribed, the match rigged from the start. But without evidence, his protests fell on deaf ears. Disgraced and disillusioned, Michael vanished from the public eye. He left behind the world that had betrayed him, retreating into obscurity. But in the shadows, he plotted his return, determined to expose the corruption that had destroyed him. Michael Harris spent years in the quietest corners of America. He drifted through towns where nobody recognized his face or cared about his past. In the stillness of cheap motel rooms, he studied. He read contracts, court filings, and biographies of men who had beaten systems rigged against them. He learned the language of backroom deals and corporate betrayals. He understood now what he hadn't then. The fight in the ring was only part of the war. He changed his name. Samuel Bryant was born a quiet, observant man with a low profile and a knack for getting into places unnoticed. In factories and gyms, he learned to blend in, listening, picking up whispers about powerful men who kept their empires afloat with money and lies. The pieces came together when he found an old trainer in Philadelphia who had once worked Monroe's corner. The man had nothing left to lose. His own career in tatters, his conscience heavy. Over bitter coffee in a dim kitchen, the trainer confessed everything. The bribes, the doctored water, the envelopes passed between officials. Michael recorded every word. From there, it was methodical. He traced the dirty money. Shell companies, fake charities, untraceable payments routed through offshore accounts. He followed the paper trail, learning the names of men who had orchestrated his ruin. Douglas Reed, Monroe's promoter. Vincent Clark, a network executive who had turned a blind eye. Mark Garrison, a commissioner on the state athletic board. They were connected like a spider web, each thread woven with greed. Years passed. Michael built his case, gathering documents, recordings, testimonies from former employees and bitter ex-wives. He grew careful, never revealing his hand too soon. When the time was right, he returned to the boxing world, not as a fighter, but as a quiet sponsor under a different name. His money was clean, his presence discreet. He backed a promising new boxer, Eric Cole, who climbed the ranks quickly, drawing attention. Eric Cole's rise created the perfect smokescreen. Through him, Michael moved in the same circles as the men who had destroyed him, listening, watching, waiting. He attended fundraisers, dinners, even private training sessions. Under the guise of mentorship, he charmed Monroe, whose arrogance had only grown with the years. Monroe laughed off the past, mocking the fallen fighter whose name no longer carried weight. What Monroe didn't realize was that his new ally had wired everything: the hotel suites, the locker rooms, even the cars they rode in. Michael collected hours of conversations, brags about bribing referees, boasts about fixing matches, offhand remarks about blackmailing rival promoters. He wasn't just gathering dirt, he was building a noose. The stage was set when Eric Cole earned a title shot against Monroe himself. The media called it a Cinderella story, a young underdog rising to face a seasoned champion. The rematch was set in the same arena where Michael's life had fallen apart, the same ring under the same unforgiving lights. Tickets sold out in hours. The world was watching. The night before the fight, Michael quietly sent encrypted files to journalists, regulators, and law enforcement. He had prepared everything: temp-topped recordings, financial documents, hidden camera footage. At the same time, he ensured the broadcast team had a special live feed set to interrupt the usual programming. As Monroe gloated in front of reporters, Michael stood in the shadows of the arena, his face calm, his hands steady. He was ready. The trap was closing, and when it snapped shut, there would be no escape. The world would see everything. The night of the fight was electric. The arena hummed with energy, camera crews swarming the ring like flies. The world tuned in, waiting for the clash between Eric Cole, the underdog, and Monroe, the reigning champion. Monroe wore arrogance like a robe, strutting through the ropes with a grin stretched across his face. His entourage laughed, secure in the belief that they had already won. They had done it before. Bribed, silenced, crushed opposition. This fight was just another show. But Michael was waiting. In the production booth high above the ring, he sat with a calm that belied the storm brewing around him. The technicians barely noticed him. To them, he was just another corporate sponsor rep ensuring a smooth broadcast. They didn't know that the encrypted feed was primed to hijack the live broadcast at the perfect moment. When the first bell rang, Eric Cole fought like a man possessed. His punches were sharp, precise, but he didn't fall into Monroe's traps. Michael had warned him of every dirty trick: the subtle low blows, the referee's blind spots, the doctored gloves. Eric stayed one step ahead, frustrating Monroe, who began to grow reckless. Then, in the fourth round, as Monroe threw a looping hook and Eric countered with a clean right, Michael hit the switch. The arena screens flickered, the commentators' voices crackled and died, the broadcast feed cut to black for a breathless moment. Then a new image appeared. On every screen, in every living room, tuned into the fight, a grainy video played. Hidden cameras in locker rooms showed Monroe's team slipping substances into water bottles. Secret recordings caught Douglas Reed bribing athletic commission officials. Surveillance footage revealed Mark Garrison laughing about falsified drug tests. Michael's voice, calm and unyielding, narrated over the images. He named every player, laid bare every crime. He explained how they had destroyed him, how they had rigged not just one fight, but years of competition. The arena fell silent. Monroe's face drained of color as the audience around him turned from cheers to gasps. His corner team froze, their panic visible. Douglas Reed, sitting ringside in an expensive suit, looked like he had been punched himself. On live television, Michael revealed bank records, signatures, wire transfers. There was no denying it now. Everything was exposed. The men who thought they were untouchable were cornered under the weight of their own lies. Eric Cole stood in the ring, fists still raised, but he wasn't the center of attention anymore. Monroe's empire was crumbling, and he knew it. His sponsors were already walking out. His name, once shouted in adoration, was now whispered with disgust. Law enforcement moved swiftly. Plainclothes officers appeared at the arena, quietly surrounding Reed, Clark, and Garrison. They didn't resist. There was nowhere to run. And Michael? He stood just outside the camera's frame, watching as everything he had built fell into place. Years of meticulous planning, of patience, of swallowing humiliation and anger, it was all paying off. He didn't need to step into the ring to win. He had already beaten them. The arena, once a cathedral of roaring triumph, became a tomb of silence. Faces in the crowd twisted in disbelief as the feed continued its merciless roll of evidence. The cameras, once focused on Monroe's smug grin, now tracked the officials as they were led away in handcuffs, their faces ghost pale under the harsh lights. Monroe stood frozen, drenched in sweat not from the fight, but from the cold realization that his carefully built world was disintegrating. He glanced to his corner, where his handlers whispered frantically into phones, where Douglas Reed had already abandoned his seat, slipping through a side door with a sick expression plastered on his face. But the eyes of the arena and the millions watching at home were all locked on him. And then, as if the walls themselves were closing in, the feed cut back to the ring. But this time it wasn't Michael's voice narrating. It was a collection of witnesses, each clip adding another nail to Monroe's coffin. A former cutman admitted to slipping drugs into Harris's water. A retired referee, now trembling with guilt, described being paid to call phantom fouls and to end fights prematurely. Even old trainers recounted stories of fighters bribed or threatened into silence. The crowd began to murmur, the tide of noise swelling into something darker. Boos erupted, not for the fight, but for the man in the ring. Monroe's fists dropped to his sides, his mouth working wordlessly. He wasn't the king now. He was a fraud, stripped bare before the world. In the control booth, Michael stood, shoulders squared, his jaw set. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. For years he had lived with the taste of ash in his mouth, with the weight of betrayal crushing his chest. Now, watching the scene unfold, he felt a quiet, consuming release. Eric Cole, catching Michael's eye from the ring, gave the faintest nod of acknowledgement. They both knew the fight was over. Monroe stumbled from the ring, shoving aside cameras, trying to flee the spotlight that now burned too hot, too close. But security blocked his path. The arena's big screen switched to live footage of law enforcement cars arriving outside. Officers filed in, their steps methodical, their faces unreadable. They weren't here for the sport. They were here to dismantle an empire built on deceit. Douglas Reed was the first to be escorted out, his designer jacket askew, shouting about misunderstandings. Mark Garrison followed, his face pinched and red, as if denial alone could erase the truth now playing on every screen. Even Vincent Clark, who had kept his hands clean for years, was led out with a look of pure disbelief. And Monroe? His exit wasn't grand. It was slow, shameful, his hands cuffed behind his back, his head bowed under the glare of camera flashes. The man who once strutted into arenas to the roar of adoration now shuffled out to a chorus of disgust and betrayal. Outside, reporters swarmed, mics thrust into faces desperate for comment. But the words had already been spoken. The evidence was irrefutable. Monroe's reign was over, not with a knockout punch, but with an avalanche of truth. Michael stepped from the shadows then, his face still hidden beneath a ball cap and glasses. To the few who glanced his way, he was just another bystander, unnoticed amid the chaos. But he felt the weight lift from his shoulders, the years of silence dissolving into the night air. He didn't linger. He didn't need to. His work was done. As he walked away from the arena, the city skyline glittering under a bruised sky, he felt a quiet, solemn peace. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't looking for applause. The world wouldn't remember Samuel Bryant, the quiet man who orchestrated the fall of Titans. But Michael Harris would remember. The headlines the next day were relentless. Monroe and his inner circle faced federal charges, fraud, bribery, racketeering. The sport's governing body launched an immediate overhaul, and officials who had once looked the other way were now fighting to keep their jobs. Fans, betrayed by years of lies, demanded accountability. Eric Cole's name was cleared. His victory, though overshadowed by the scandal, was a testament to resilience and honesty in a sport tainted by corruption. And Michael? He disappeared again, this time by choice. He left behind the world of bright lights and broken promises, content to let the truth stand in his place. Months later, a quiet article in a small paper mentioned the story of a man who had once been a rising star, a name now whispered with respect. There were no interviews, no bestseller tell-all books, just a man who refused to let them win. In the end, the men who thought they could destroy him had been exposed not by fists or threats, but by the slow, patient hand of truth. Their empire crumbled, their names forever stained. And Michael Harris, once a broken fighter, walked away, free.